Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Nice to meet you again, students. Now we have a poem here first. The title is The Golf Links by Sarah and Clegg. Do you know the meaning of golf links? Yes, that is an area of golf. The golf links lies near the mill that almost every day the laboring children can look out and see the men at play. It is a short poem, but it applies many things. You can get many things from this short poem. The golf links so near the mill. Do you know the difference between golf links and mill? The meaning of mill. Mill is a place where a factory produce something. For example, produce shoes, produce many things, many things. Produce pencil, produce pen, produce shirt, etc. And here maybe it's about mill. When you have rice from the field, then you want to cook. You cannot cook it directly, but you have to go to the mill. And then after that, you can cook the rice and you can eat it. This is the mill here. Well, the golf links is a place for people who are rich. Rich people and mill. That almost every day the laboring children can look out and see the men at play. You can imagine people playing golf and children work for money, laboring children. It is a contrast between the rich and the poor. You can imagine what is in the mind of the children when they look out and see the men at play. Maybe they want to play too, but because they are poor, they cannot afford everything about golf. Questions. Is this brief poem satiric? I'm sure that you still remember the meaning of satiric. Does it contain any verbal irony, or is the poet making a matter-of-fact statement in words that mean just what they say? It is a question. Does it contain any verbal irony? I'm sure you still remember the difference between irony and verbal irony. Is the poet making a matter-of-fact statement in words? A matter-of-fact statement. I mean direct statement. Real statement. That means just what they say. It is the question number one. Now question number two. What other kind of irony is present in the poem? So maybe you find more than one kind of irony. You can find two or three maybe. And what kind of irony of them? And then number three, Sarah and Clegg's poem dates from before the enactment of legislation against child labor. Is it still a good poem, or is it hopelessly dated? Yes, this poem dates from, created when there is no legislation against child labor. At the time, child labor is free. But now, after the enactment of the legislation against child labor, the child labor is prohibited. Now, The question is it still a good poem or is it hopelessly dated? So because it is different era, so because of the different era, then the question, is it still a good poem or is it hopelessly dated? Question number 4, how would you state its theme? You have to be able to distinguish theme from topic. Yeah? I'm sure that you still remember the difference between theme and topic. And then number 5, would you call this poem lyric, narrative, or didactic? In the first or second meeting, I gave you the definition of lyric poetry, narrative poetry, didactic poetry, etc. So I think you have to know this. What is this poem? Maybe it is lyric poetry, or maybe it is didactic poetry. Now we come to different topic, paying attention to the obvious. Do you know the meaning of this title? Paying attention to the obvious. Paying attention, I'm sure you understand the meaning of paying attention. For example, when I write down something on the blackboard or whiteboard, then I say, pay attention please. So you have to pay attention to the blackboard or the whiteboard. And then what is the meaning of obvious? Obvious is clear. Yeah? Pay attention to the obvious. You have to pay attention to everything that is clear, obvious, and you can feel it directly from the poem, of course, because what we do here is always about poetry. Paying attention to the obvious. If tone is a speaker's attitude toward his or her material, then to understand the tone of a poem, we need mostly just to listen, as we might listen to a real conversation. Yes, the tone. Yeah? Several weeks ago, we talked about tone. Tone is, do you still remember? Our attitude, yeah? The speaker's attitude toward the material, toward the condition in a poem. Then to understand the tone of a poem, we need mostly just to listen, as we might listen to a real conversation. So, for example, we read a poem. Then imagine at the time as if we listen to conversation in the poem. The key is to hear not only what is being said, but also how it is being said. Later, you will understand the meaning of what is being said and how it is being said. What is something or message in the poem and how it is being said is the way the writer or the author write the poem. For example, he uses imagery, irony, etc. That is how it is being said. Does the speaker sound noticeably surprised, angry, nostalgic, tender, or expectant? A common mistake in analyzing poetry is to discuss subtle points of interpretation before you fully understand the obvious features of a poem. So here you have to know the speaker's attitude. Does the speaker sound noticeably surprised, angry, nostalgic, tender, or expectant? Now, please remember the poem, Oh No. Do you still remember the poem, Oh No? Yes. The poem at that time tells about something happy. Someone comes to a place, then everyone there welcome him, and they are happy. But the title of the poem, oh no, so it is contrast between the title and the content of the poem. This is the writer's or the poet's attitude toward the poem. He is not angry, but is like surprised because of the condition at the time. A common mistake in analyzing poetry is to discuss subtle points of interpretation. Do you know the meaning of subtle points? Subtle points is a very specific points, very specific and very secret points. Here, it is a kind of reminder, before you fully understand the obvious features of a poem. So, at first, you have to know the obvious features of the poem before you think about something under or something in the poem itself. Probably, the easier way to say is you have to know the surface structure before you try to talk about the deep structure. In critical writing, it almost never hurts to begin by asking obvious questions. We come to obvious questions, not subtle questions, but obvious questions. Number one, does the speaker reveal any obvious emotion or attitude about the subject or the setting of the poem? When D.H. Lawrence, for example, ends his poem Piano on page 10 by saying, I weep like a child for the past. He makes his nostalgic and tender tone explicit. This is an example of something obvious. I weep like a child for the past. You can imagine when a child weep or cry, they move everything. His hands, his legs, and also very expressive face. That's something obvious here. I weep like a child for the past. You can imagine how a child weep in the past when they are still small child. He makes his nostalgic and tender tone explicit. We can understand clearly. Number two, if there is an implied listener or listeners to the poem, how does the speaker address them? Is there anything obviously unusual about the tone? In Benjamin's in Westminster Abbey, for example, the speaker addresses God with astonishing egocentricity and snooty nonchalance. So here, an example. If there is an implied listener or listeners to the poem, usually a poem is addressed to someone. For example, we write a poem for someone we love, or we write a poem for our father, for our mother, for our friends, etc. We can do that. So the poem usually is addressed to someone or something. Here, in the example, in Westminster Abbey, the title of the poem, the speaker addresses God with astonishing egocentricity and snooty nonchalance. here the speaker says that God is unimportant according to him. Yeah? Astonishing egocentricity here. He is selfish, and maybe he is not a person with religion. So he says that his work is totally because of his effort. That's an example of implied listener or listeners. Number 3, is there any obvious difference between the reaction of the speaker to what is happening in the poem and your own honest reactions? If the gap between the two reactions is large, as it is in Robert Browning's My Last Duties, for instance, what does it suggest? So, reaction. Yeah? Is there any obvious difference between the reaction of the speaker to what is happening in the poem and your own honest reaction? I mean, here, the reaction of the speaker or the author and the reaction of we as reader. As readers, we have to react to what's happening in the poem, and also the speaker. The speaker also react to the condition in the poem. You can again remember to "Oh no," the poem "Oh no." Here you can imagine the reaction of speaker to what is happening in the poem. It seems that the speaker is surprised, while we as reader, it depends. Yeah? For example, I react positively, but maybe you react negatively. It depends. It depends on different person. Number 4, if the difference between your honest reaction and the speaker's is enormous, is the poem in some way ironic? Here, for example, the difference between your honest reaction and the speaker's is enormous. Do you know the meaning of enormous? Enormous is big. Yeah, very different. That is a very different attitude between the speakers and the readers. If the difference is enormous, if the difference is very big, maybe the poem is ironic. So that's the question. Maybe the poem is ironic. Okay, so this is our point today, that we have to understand, paying attention to something obvious in the poem. Obvious may be the reaction of the reader, the reaction of the writer, the tone, attitude. So everything in a poem must be taken into consideration, especially the obvious ones, before we interpret deeper. Again, maybe I can say in an easy word, you have to understand the surface structure before we go to the deep structure. That's the point. Okay, I think it's enough for today. Nice to meet you today. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you next time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.